The month is officially over, and that means it's time for a wrap-up. Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alex, and today is the December 2024 wrap-up. So everything I read last month. It is officially 2025, so Happy New Year. I hope that your holiday season has been everything you needed it to be for you. I am very glad the holidays are over. I'm glad that we've moved into the new year. I've been a little bit sick, but I've been sick on and off since like October, so it's whatever at this point. So the wrap up is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to put a picture of the book here that I read, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the synopsis, why I liked it, why I didn't, and then I will tell you what I ended up rating it. Let's take a minute to go over my rating system before we get into it. Make sure you hit all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week, and all we do on this channel is talk about books. So if you like listening to people talk about books, here I am every week doing just that for you. So the rating system is pretty simple. 5 stars, best of the best. I absolutely loved it. I will recommend it to anybody and everybody. No notes. 4 stars means I still really liked it, but I did have minor issues, like maybe the pace wasn't good, maybe some of the character work didn't work out for me, or there's plot holes. 3 stars means I didn't like it, but it was a subjectivity issue, which means I just wasn't the right reader for the book. I would still recommend this book to people, but only if I knew this was something that was really in their wheelhouse, something I knew they would really enjoy. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the book, it just didn't work for me. 2 stars means I didn't like it, and I probably won't recommend it to anybody. It had fundamental issues, and I really just didn't enjoy it. 1 star is the worst of the worst. I usually reserve this rating for books that have a lot of racism, homophobia, transphobia, any kind of book that puts like grooming or rape or anything like that in sort of like an honorable light, or kind of like embellishes it as like a positive thing. No, that's going to be a 1-star book. And then cultural appropriation also falls under my 1-star ratings. Not very many books get the 1 star, so I mean, yeah, it has to be pretty bad for me to pull that one out. So yeah, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into what I read in December. The first book that I read in December was This Is How I Lied by Heather Gudenkauf. Okay, so I read Heather Gudenkauf last winter, and I really enjoyed that book, and so this is the second time I think this book has been on a maybe series, so I decided to check it out and see if I liked it or not. This book actually ended up being pretty good. So we're following a woman who is a detective in a small town, and as she's like nearing the end of her pregnancy, she is handed a case that goes back to her childhood. So when she was in high school, her best friend turned up dead in a cave system near their home. And this is the case that ended up going cold. And now some new evidence has come to light, and she's going to reopen the case and find out who killed her best friend from her past. Okay, so this book ended up being really interesting, but it did take some time. There were a lot of red herrings in this book, a lot of misdirection, and there was a really big twist in this book, but it was right in the middle. I think it was like at the 49% mark where this huge reveal came out. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, what are we going to do with the second half of the book now that this has come out? And it did take me a little while to get from the halfway mark to like the 3/4 mark, because I felt like we were just wasting time. It ended up working out, like everything ended up coming together in a really spectacular way. And I really appreciated the work that Heather Gudenkauf did on this book. But yeah, the pace in the middle was not good. And I felt like we didn't have anywhere to move, if you know what I mean. And by the time we got to the end of the book, after everything had kind of settled down, I still had some lingering questions. Like nothing earth-shattering, nothing that would have changed the plot or the ending of the book. There were just like little things that I felt like she didn't tie up. And I do remember feeling that exact same way after I finished the last book of hers that I read, which was The Overnight Guest. I remember thinking, what about this? What about that? These red herrings that were in the book were not like absolved or cleared in any way. They were just kind of like there, and you were just supposed to kind of ignore it. And I did feel like that's kind of what happened at the end of this book. Like we were just supposed to be like, oh, it was a red herring and it didn't mean anything. and we're supposed to just not pay attention to it anymore, which like annoyed me a little bit. But like I said, it didn't change anything about the ending of the book. Like it didn't like stop the ending of the book from making sense, if that makes sense. I ended up giving this 4 stars. It did really end up working out, and it was very surprising, and I was just latched in the whole time because I had to know what we were going to do, what was going to end up happening. I wanted to know how this girl ended up in that cave dead. There was actually like a lot of motive for a lot of people to kill this young woman, and the longer we got into it, the more it was just like everybody had some secret. And everybody was willing to do whatever they had to do to keep their secrets. So yeah, I thought this one was pretty good. The pace in the middle, like I said, a little bit weird, but it really came full circle in the end. So yeah, I think Heather Gudenkauf is going to go into my regular lineup. Because like I said, this is the second book I've done by her. Was it a smash hit out of the park? Like, absolutely loved it. No notes? No. Was it solid thriller? Yes. Very solid. The next book I read in December was Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. Okay, y'all, I finally read this book. Rock, Paper, Scissors has been on many a maybe series on this channel, okay? Alice Feeney has been on many lists for me. I finally read it, so here we are. Was it good? Yeah, it was pretty good. Pretty good. I did this one on audio. I will say the audio narration was pretty good, but it also was a little bit confusing. I feel like I would have been able to get more out of it if I had read it, but I just simply did not have time, okay? Things were crazy over here. There was no way I was going to be able to physically sit down and read this book, so the audiobook really came in clutch for me. It was dual perspective, so we're getting the husband and the wife. So basically, these two have been married for a while, and they decide we're going to go on a little weekend getaway in the Scottish Highlands. They end up staying at this little chapel, which is what's depicted on the cover. And of course, like when they get there, there's a snowstorm, and then they get snowed in, and all this weird stuff starts happening in the chapel. Like pictures start going missing on the walls. The power goes on and off. Their dog goes missing. Lots of random stuff happening, okay? And all the while, we're also getting the story of this little woman that lives adjacent to the chapel. And so she's kind of watching them go through all this, and we're getting her perspective of that as well. This book was twisted, and you really had to pay attention, okay, because there was a lot of moving pieces. We're getting the history of the married couple on the page, because like every year the wife writes her husband a secret letter on their anniversary. So we're going back in time, and we're getting these letters along the way. And that's like kind of helping us round out their history together, like what's been happening through the years that kind of lead them to this point. And then we're getting what's happening in the chapel in real time as they're on this vacation that's sort of turned into this nightmare. And then we're getting the perspective of this woman that's also watching them go through all this happenings at the chapel and not interceding or helping them. Lots of moving pieces, okay? The suspense in this was really good. The twist towards the 3/4 mark of the book was amazing. When I tell you I had to stop the audiobook and just sit for a minute and think about everything and make everything click together, it was crazy. It changed my entire perspective of everything on the page that I had read so far. It literally blew me away. And up until this point, I was not having a good time. Okay, that's the crazy part. I have a couple friends that I know have read this book, and I was probably at like the 30% mark or something, and I was just not into it. I ended up reaching out to my friends I knew had read it and been like, should I keep going? I am on the verge of DNFing this book. I'm not having a good time. And all of them told me, hold out, it's going to get better. And I thought, okay, I can hold out for a little bit longer. And yeah, it did get better. But I will say the first half of this book was really rough. I just felt like we were doing nothing. I didn't really like the characters. I didn't like them together. I didn't like them separately. There ended up being a reason for that. So I would say if you're reading that and you're feeling that at the beginning, seriously just buckle in and hang on, because it's about to get really crazy. But yeah, at the beginning of the book, I was not really feeling it. I was struggling quite a bit. It really did pick up in the second half though, and the twist ended up making up for everything that I was feeling in the first half of the book. I ended up giving this 4 stars. Like I said, the reason it didn't get the 5 is because I was having so many issues at the beginning of the book. Like, I feel like Alice Feeney probably could have dumped a little bit more in there to sort of keep us trucking along. Because I would imagine if people are like, I DNF'd it, that's where they would DNF, is in the first quarter to half of the book, because there just was not enough movement and the characters were not insanely likable. I'm glad I stuck it out. I'm glad I sat through it, because it really did end up being a lot more than I was expecting. It did come out being really good. The ending of the book, I don't know about that. I don't know. If you've read it, I think you know what I mean, but I don't know about that. I don't know how that's going to work out for everybody. But yeah, I ended up really liking it. Will I read Alice Feeney again? Probably. I'll probably aim for one of her books that has a little bit better reviews. This one was really mixed. I feel like this was like a solid 3.5. So like the reviews were here and there on that. But yeah, I had a good time. The last book I read in December was Their Blood Rite by M.J. Lawrie. This was chosen for my book club, and I actually read this one physical read. It has been a long time, you guys, since I have physically read a book all the way through. Like, I've done popcorn reading a few times in the past couple months where, like, I'll jump back and forth between the audio and the physical. But this was the first one in a long time that I've read physically straight through. I've done a lot of audiobooks like the second half of the year. I think it's just because I've been busy with work. And if you guys don't know, I'm a beta reader, so like physically reading is like my job. And I think I just get tired of physically reading because I do it all day for work. But yeah, this was the first one I physically read in a while, and I had such a great time with this book, you guys. Like I said, this was chosen for my book club. This is about a young woman. She's about to come up on her 18th birthday, and in her coven on her 18th birthday they have this ritual that all of the girls that are turning 18 have to go through, and it's very brutal and awful, and it's basically them coming into their blood rite powers within their coven, and a lot of other really unsavory things happen at this ritual, and basically all the women of all the covens in the area hate this, okay? But they like have to do it in order to become a full member of a coven. On the night of the ritual, pretty much everything goes wrong, and our young character Ash ends up getting kidnapped by 3 vampire demigods. And that is where our story takes off, okay? I'm really literally not going to tell you anything else. Okay. If you've been on my channel a minute, you know vampires are not my thing. They're really not. I think it's a completely overplayed genre. I'm so tired of reading about vampires. When this came up for our book club, everybody voted on it, and, you know, this is what we decided to read. I was not looking forward to this book. Number one, because I couldn't get it on audio, and I knew that my December was going to be jam-packed and busy, and I just didn't know if I was literally going to be able to finish it. Luckily, it's not super long, okay? So that was one thing I was worried about, was length, because this does fall under fantasy, and, you know, fantasy books are historically pretty long books. So this one's not that bad. I think it's like maybe only 300 pages. So I was worried about length. I was worried about not being able to get it on audio. And then it was a vampire book. And I was like, I'm not going to have a good time with this book. Like, I struggle so much with vampire reads, and I just never end up having a good time. This book blew me away. Okay? And let me tell you why. I thought the world building was so easily digestible that it didn't feel like fantasy to me. Which, just a little side note, this did come up when we were discussing it in book club. Some of the more, I don't know what you would say, dedicated fantasy readers were very much like, this is not fantasy, this was not high fantasy, this is not true fantasy. Y'all, I don't get where people get these weird opinions from, okay? Like, because this is a fantasy book. This is witches, this is vampires. There's fairies, there's pixies, there's banshees, there's shapeshifters. How does this not qualify as a fantasy book, right? If you want me to, like, make you happy by saying this is light fantasy, sure. Whatever's gonna make you feel on your moral high horse about fantasy, sure. Whatever. Not all fantasy books have to be 800 pages. Not all fantasy books have to have complicated cast systems. Not all fantasy books have to follow a certain criteria or schematic, blueprint, whatever you want to call it. I liked it because it was extremely digestible, very easy. I didn't need to know the entire history of the world that we were living in for me to feel attracted to this book, for me to feel like I was in it. I didn't need to understand a super complex magic system because I don't think the magic system is complex. I really don't. I think if you read witches books or you like witch stories, things like that, then a lot of this just naturally made sense and I didn't have a ton of questions about it. I don't think fantasy has to be complicated. I think that's the thing that makes me the most mad about fantasy is we don't have to make it complicated, but so many writers do, and so many readers think that this is the only way to read or digest fantasy. It's not. Not all fantasy books have to be extremely complex. Not every fantasy book needs to have these huge info dumps that are so hard to digest that you end up losing interest in the book. Not everything has to be that way. And I think that was the sort of thing that set me off when we were having a discussion, is because, like, not all of us want to read crap like that. Sorry, it's not crap. But not all of us want to read stuff like that. I don't. That is the main reason I stay away from fantasies, because it's normally overcomplicated stuff that I just don't have any interest slogging through, because I'm fine just using my imagination. I'm fine with just reading something and be like, oh, that's what it's like in this world, and moving on with my life. I'm fine doing that. Also, a lot of places in this book, like, we're in first person point of view. A lot of the information that our main character is seeking is information she doesn't know. So she's learning as she goes, and so that means we as the reader are learning as we go as well. And so she's not meant to know everything because we're in first person. So it made sense to me. It fit with the piece that we didn't know every single thing that was happening. And it was okay for us to learn as we went. Okay, so I'm going to get off that. But I found this very digestible in that sense. The world building to me was very easy, and I didn't have trouble navigating the world, the history, the magic, nothing. It didn't feel incomplete to me. It felt fine. This was by far the most interesting take on vampires I've read in a long time, okay? And that was one of the reasons that I was okay with it being a vampire book, like, after we started it, because it all happens kind of quickly. Like, you know, the big ritual thing happens at the beginning, and then we're kind of off and going. So once we started getting into the lore of these three men that took our main character and learning about who they were, I really found it super interesting, because this was not just a traditional vampire book, right? Like, these men had depth outside of vampirism, which I found very interesting and really cool, because I'm just so tired of seeing the cut and dry vampire story, you know? And so this was not that, which I think really elevated it for me, because I was not looking for a vampire book. Character growth, the character development on the page was so good for our main character. I absolutely loved it. She did not just, you know, fall for these men and become like a little noodle. She really did grow within herself and on the page, and I absolutely loved seeing that. And by the end of the book, I was so excited for where she was going to go next. I think this is a trilogy, by the way. I absolutely loved what Lawrie did with this character. I feel like this character really just exploded on the page, like, every minute she was there, and I absolutely loved it. I will say I would only recommend this book for 18 and up. It is very smut heavy, but, you know, we talked about this, I think it was like in last week's episode or maybe a previous one, about like books that are porn with plot and plot with porn. This is definitely the second. The plot really was the main part of this book, and the smutty bits really were just extra, okay? It wasn't all about their sexual connection on the page. Like, if anything, that was kind of put in the background, but it was very graphic and very detailed, okay? I would definitely say check the trigger warnings on this. It's like 2 pages long, I would say, And the trigger warnings are very detailed, okay? So, like, if you are nervous about reading it, I would say check the trigger warning, because I think the author did a really good job of forewarning the reader. She also put a note in her book where the trigger warning was that, like, most of the time you probably will not like the male main characters, and they were designed that way. And that was sort of a big thing that came up in the book club, was a lot of people just didn't like the male main characters, and it's like, well, she said at the beginning of the book that we probably wouldn't. So that, to me, one, good writing, and two, that means that she's obviously got other things planned for them in the upcoming books. I ended up giving this 5 stars. I know. I very rarely give 5 stars anymore. This book blew me away, like, for real. I went into this book expecting to be so disappointed. The last couple times we've done fantasy for my book club, I am not a fantasy girly, okay? It's not my favorite thing. But I heavily enjoyed this, okay? Number one, it was not a cut and dry vampire book, and I really loved that. Number two, the female main character here, Lawrie, really put in the work. She didn't just suddenly become this, badass character. Like, she started out really awesome, and then she just continued to get better. The growth on the page was good. I thought the lore was really good. And number one, the reason the lore was so good for me is because it was so accessible. We didn't have to have 1,700 pages of description for the lore to fill in for me. And I absolutely love that. Now, I think, we did get into that in my previous part of this review, but I think that's up to you, how you like to read your fantasy. My fantasy needs to be easily digestible because I'm a pretty easy gal. So I appreciated that Lawrie made it very accessible. I thought the smut scenes were really good, well written. I was worried because this is like, it does have the virgin trope in it, and so usually books like that don't play out that well for me, but I think that this was done really well. This is the first book in a long time where I'm like eager for the second book, okay? I do see the second book going into the lineup in 25 because I really want to see how it turns out, okay? There were just so many interesting things about this book that just kept making me happy. And I really love the work that Lawrie put into it, and I am excited to see how the next book follows up. A few people in book club have already started it, and they said it's a little heavy, like dark, in the first half of the book, so just kind of like buckle in. But yeah, I do see book 2 going into the 25 lineup. I really had a great time with this. I think if you're wanting something just different, if you're reading fantasy, you're wanting something different, you're wanting something a little bit more simple, this, I think, is a lot more my speed with fantasy. I just had a good time. Like, I was laughing, I was crying, I felt betrayed, I felt angry. I just had all the emotions when reading this book. And like I said, I like the lore. I think Lawrie really did something cool with this one. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. That's everything I read in December of 24. I thought it was a really good way to close out the year. Like, really good books for the end of the year. I was so happy. There's been some months where it's just been not great, And so I was really happy to end the year on a high note, especially with their Blood Rite. Like, that was literally the last book I read. I think I finished it on New Year's Eve. And I remember thinking, man, what a way to end the year. What a way to end the year. I was so happy with that book. So yeah, I think next week we're going to go over my goals. We're going to see what we hit. I'm kind of excited, kind of nervous. I don't really know. And then we'll get to make new goals. So we're going to go over our goals from 24. We're going to see how I did. And then I'm going to make all my goals for 25. And we're going to see how we do there. See it play out in real time, right? Let me know what you guys read in December, how you guys closed out your year, if you had a great year, if 24 ended nicely for you. I hope it did. I hope the chaoticness of 24 does not continue into 25. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. I say this at the beginning of every year, but I hope this year is everything you need it to be. I need 25 to be a lot of things, okay? I'm hoping it's going to be everything I need it to be, and I hope the same for you. So, goodbye 24, hello 25. Let me know in the comments what you're hoping to read this year, what you read at the end of 24. I love hearing from all of you. And that's all I have for you guys today. So I will see you all next time. Bye.